The night I found the receipt in her coat pocket, I told myself it was nothing. That's what you do after 19 years with someone. You talk yourself down. You find the reasonable explanation before the unreasonable one has a chance to settle in. The receipt was from a restaurant called Ember and Oak, about 40 minutes from our house. A Tuesday night. 2 glasses of wine, an entree, a dessert. The total was $87. I stood in the laundry room, holding that little slip of paper, and I tried to remember if she had mentioned dinner with a colleague, a friend, anyone. She hadn't. I put it back in her coat pocket, and I finished transferring the load to the dryer, and I went to bed before she did that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself 19 years meant something. I told myself she was the woman who cried at those animal rescue commercials, and who always remembered to call my mother on her birthday even when I forgot. I told myself a lot of things that night. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I never went through her phone. I never questioned her about where she'd been or who she'd talked to. That wasn't the kind of marriage we had. Or at least, that wasn't the kind of marriage I thought we had. I'm 51 years old. I work in commercial property management. I drive a practical car. I mow my own lawn. I watch too much baseball. My daughter is 23 and lives across the country in Portland. My life is not dramatic. I never wanted it to be, which is probably why it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. The receipt was the first thing, but when I started paying attention, really paying attention, the way you do when something small has cracked the glass, I started noticing others. She had started working late, not every night, maybe twice a week, but late enough that dinner would be cold or already cleaned up by the time she got home. She always had an explanation. A client deadline, a quarterly report, a meeting that ran long. Every explanation was plausible. Every one of them landed just slightly wrong. She had also started carrying her phone differently. Before, she would leave it on the kitchen counter while she cooked, face up, notifications chirping. Now it was always in her pocket. Now it was always in her pocket or face down on whatever surface was nearest. I noticed this the way you notice a piece of furniture has been moved. The room looks the same, but something is off and you can't help staring at the empty corner where the chair used to be. I didn't say anything. There was a Wednesday night in February when I came downstairs at around 11 because I couldn't sleep. She was on the couch with her laptop. She closed it when she heard me on the stairs. Just casually, like she was just finishing up. She smiled at me and said she was coming to bed soon, and she asked if I wanted tea. I said no thank you, and I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time after that. The thing about suspicion, real suspicion, is that it doesn't feel like certainty. It feels like nausea. It feels like something you ate has turned on you, and you're waiting to find out how bad it's going to get. I was nauseated for about 6 weeks before I actually knew anything for sure. The confirmation came in a way I didn't expect. It was a Saturday morning in late March. She had gone out to run errands, which is something she did every Saturday. Grocery store, dry cleaner, sometimes the hardware store if there was something the house needed. Normal. Routine. I had been in the home office doing some work when I realized I had left my reading glasses in the car. I went out to the driveway. Her car was still in the garage, which meant she had taken mine. Which meant she had her phone mounted on my dashboard, which meant, when I checked, that she had forgotten to close her navigation app. I stood in the cold garage in my socks staring at my phone, where her app was still open through the Bluetooth sync. The address she had navigated to that morning was not the grocery store. It was not the dry cleaner. It was a residential address in a neighborhood, about 20 minutes away, that I had never had any reason to visit in my life. I took a screenshot. Then I stood there for a very long time. What I felt in that moment was not rage. It wasn't even sadness, not yet. What I felt was this strange, total stillness, like all the noise I had been generating inside myself for weeks had suddenly gone quiet. The question I had been afraid to ask had answered itself without my permission. I went back inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. She came home 2 hours later with groceries and a story about traffic on Ridgefield Avenue. And I looked at her across the counter, and I nodded, and I helped her put the vegetables away. I am not proud of the next 3 weeks. Or maybe I am in a cold way I don't fully understand yet. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. What I did instead was listen and watch and wait. I found out his name by accident, the way most things come out. She had a call on speaker in the car. She didn't know I had walked into the garage, and I heard maybe 45 seconds of it before I stepped back into the house. 45 seconds was enough. His name was the kind of name that sticks. I'm not going to write it here, because I don't want to give it any more space than it's already taken up in my head. What I will tell you is that, from those 45 seconds, I understood two things. First, that this had been going on for a while. The shorthand they used, the easy way they spoke over each other, the specific kind of comfortable that you only build over time, none of that was new. Second, that she had told him I didn't know. I heard her laugh at something he said, and then she said, casual as anything, he has no idea. I went back inside, and I stood at the kitchen sink, and I looked out the window at the backyard, where I had built a raised garden bed the summer before, because she said she wanted to grow tomatoes. I stood there looking at that empty garden bed for a long time. He has no idea. I replayed those 4 words approximately 10,000 times over the following days. Each time I replayed them, something in me got a little quieter and a little harder. I called my brother that weekend. He's 5 years older than me, lives out in Tucson. I didn't tell him everything, not then. I told him I was going through some things, and I might need to come stay with him for a little while at some point. He didn't ask questions. He just said the guest room was mine whenever I needed it. That's the kind of person he is. I also called a lawyer. Her name isn't important. She had an office downtown, off a side street, the kind of law office that's been in the same building for 30 years. I had never called a divorce lawyer in my life. I didn't even know where to start looking. I just found her through the State Bar website, and she had good reviews and availability the following Thursday. I did not tell my wife I was going downtown that Thursday. The lawyer was direct, and she was thorough, and she told me things I needed to know about the process, about documentation, about what mattered and what didn't. I left her office 2 hours later with a folder of information and a clearer sense of what the next several months would look like. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 10 minutes before I started driving. I want to be honest here. There was part of me during those weeks that kept hoping I was wrong, that kept constructing alternative explanations, even when the evidence was long past the point where explanations helped. I think that's normal. 19 years is not nothing. You don't just flip a switch. There is grief in it, even before you've lost anything. Even when the loss is something you're choosing, even when you know with absolute certainty that the choice is right. But I also knew I wasn't wrong. In early April, she told me she was going to visit her college roommate for a long weekend. Thursday to Sunday. Her college roommate lives in Savannah, and they do try to see each other once or twice a year, so this was not unusual on its surface. She showed me the flight confirmation. She packed her good weekend bag, the leather one she got for our anniversary a few years back. I drove her to the airport Thursday morning. I watched her walk through the sliding doors with that leather bag. And I thought about the anniversary trip where we bought it. A long weekend in a rented cabin in the Smokies. I thought about how happy she seemed then. I thought about whether she was actually happy then, or whether I had been misreading her for longer than I understood. Then I drove home. I had not been idle in the weeks before this. I want to be clear about that. The lawyer had advised me on what I needed, and I had spent 2 careful weeks putting things in order. Not hiding things, exactly. More like separating things. Getting clarity on what was mine and what was shared and what would need to go through the process and what wouldn't. I had also spoken to my accountant. I had also spoken to my brother again, this time for longer, this time with more of the truth. My brother said, "What do you need me to do?" I said, "Not yet." But by Thursday afternoon, with her at the airport and the house quiet around me, I was ready for yet. I called the movers on Friday morning. I had arranged everything the week before. A small storage unit, a moving company that had a Saturday availability, a list of what was coming with me and what wasn't. Not everything, not furniture, just what was mine and what I'd need. My clothes, my tools, the files from the office, the framed photos from my side of the bedroom, the small things that constitute a life and take up so little space when you put them in boxes. By Saturday evening, the house was not empty. It looked almost the same. But there were gaps, the kind of small gaps that announce something has changed before you can identify exactly what. I had one more thing to do before I left. Before I left, I had prepared the papers with the lawyer. Not a surprise. Divorce filings aren't, but the manner of delivery was mine to decide. I left the envelope on the kitchen table with her name on it in my handwriting, held down by the ceramic mug she'd bought at a farmer's market upstate that I had always thought was too heavy and she had always loved. I don't know why I used that mug. It just seemed right to leave her something of her own to anchor it to. I took my key off the ring and put it on the table beside the envelope. Then I got in my car and I drove. My brother lives about 14 hours from here by road. I had made a reservation at a motel in a small town in eastern Tennessee for Saturday night. I've driven through that part of the country before, years ago, for work. There's a particular quality to the light out there in early evening, especially in spring, that I've never quite been able to describe accurately. Something about the way the ridgeline cuts the sky. I pulled into that motel parking lot a little after 9 in the evening, and I sat for a moment, and I listened to the engine tick down. I was not angry. I want to record that. I was something more tired than angry, the way you feel at the end of a very long project when the work is done, and all that's left is to live with what you've built. She started calling at around 10 that night. I watched the phone light up on the passenger seat. I did not answer. She called 4 more times before midnight. She texted twice. The text said, "Please call me, and then I know you know." I read them, and I put the phone face down on the nightstand, and I went to sleep earlier than I had slept in months. She flew home Sunday morning. I know this because I had been on the same airline's app enough times to know how to track a flight. Not that I spent long looking. She landed just before noon. By that point, I was in Mississippi, windows down, listening to a radio station playing old country. I didn't know the names of. My daughter called me that afternoon. I don't know what she had been told or by whom. She said, "Dad, where are you?" And her voice was so careful that I knew she already understood more than I had explained. I told her I was driving to Uncle Eddie's, and I was fine, and I would call her again when I stopped for the night. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said, "I think I'm going to be." There was a pause. She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too, sweetheart." I pulled over at a rest stop outside Jackson to get coffee from a vending machine that was surprisingly decent, and I stood there in the afternoon light with the cup in my hand and 18-wheelers passing at the edge of the lot. And I tried to figure out what I was feeling. It was something I didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness, not relief exactly. Something more like the first quiet breath after a long-held tension. Something like the moment the fog clears enough to see that the road is still there. 19 years. I am not going to tell you she was a villain. I'm not going to do that, because it isn't true. And because I've thought about this enough to know that reducing her to a villain would be a way of making sense of something that doesn't fully make sense. People who have been loved and have loved in return don't become strangers all at once. It happens in degrees, over time, in the accumulation of small silences and small choices, until one day the distance between two people is so wide that one of them starts looking for the other half of themselves somewhere else. I am not excusing what she did. I want to be precise about that. There is nothing that makes what she did acceptable, and there is nothing that removes the fact that she lied to my face for months while I put her vegetables away and made her coffee in the mornings and believed, genuinely believed, that I knew who I was living with. What I am saying is that the anger has edges, and the edges are not simple. I got to Eddie's house on Sunday evening later than expected because I took a wrong turn somewhere outside of Mobile and added 40 minutes I hadn't planned for. He was on the porch when I pulled in, like he'd been watching for me, which he probably had. He didn't say anything dramatic. He came down the steps, and he shook my hand. And then he pulled me in and held on for a moment, the way older brothers do when they don't have words either. Then he said, "Come on inside. I made chili." I sat at his kitchen table and I ate chili, and we talked about his job and his garden and the baseball season, and we didn't talk about her at all that night. That was exactly what I needed, and he knew it without being told. I have been in Tucson for 6 weeks now. I have a routine. I wake up early. I go for a walk in the desert before the heat comes. I call my daughter on Tuesdays. The divorce process is moving through the courts the way these things do, slowly and mechanically, like a glacier. The lawyer says it will take several more months. I am not impatient. I have nowhere to be. I have thought, on and off, about what I would say to her if we talked. We have communicated only through the lawyers since that Sunday. I have thought about whether I want an explanation, whether an explanation would change anything, whether the reason would make the fact of it different. I have decided, mostly, that it wouldn't. That the fact is the fact. That understanding the reason is something I can pursue in my own mind for as long as I need to, without needing it from her. What I know is this. 19 years of my life were real. The cabin in the Smokies was real. The morning she cried when our daughter left for college was real. The Tuesday nights on the couch watching old movies were real. None of that stops being real because of what came after. Grief is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it's just love with nowhere left to go. I am 51 years old. I work in commercial property management. I drive a practical car. I mow my own lawn, or I will again when I have one. I didn't disappear because I was running away. I disappeared because I needed to be the one who decided where I went next.